Hello everybody, my name is John Droney, and welcome to another episode of Godzilla and His Amazing Friends with audio commentary. This month's selection is episode 9, entitled Battle on the High Seas. Much like the previous audio commentaries, you will hear trivia that was not known about the episode, as well as clarifying some things that didn't happen in the episode. So let's get into it. Now first off, this scene here with Godzilla and Red King battling. Yes, the majority of it does include stock footage from episode 1. This ultimately means that this takes place between episodes 1 and 2. And it also reclarifies that although the pilot is a little out of place, what with it not taking place on Monster Island, it is still part of the main story, which I do plan on getting onto when the series picks back up, or when I get to this particular point again in the series. So, ultimately, this is another backwards episode. Much like episode 7, it takes place earlier in the story, even though it's entitled later. And also, I should also mention this because of that little pan-out scene right there. This is also the first actual episode in which I started to implement a lot of new tricks with the series. More specifically, I introduced motion graphics into the episode. Now, what this ultimately means is that I am able to use actual moving imagery in the episode. Around this time in which the episode was completed, I was just finishing up my motion graphics course in college, because it was the end of my second semester, and from it, I thought the motion graphics course was a little pretty interesting because it works very closely to what I do with this series here, and so I wanted to implement the use of it much more by including moving imagery as well. And so, as a result, I started looking into more and more editing softwares, which ultimately lead me to the software I used for this episode, as well as episodes 10, 11, 12, and 13, Pinnacle Studio 12 Ultimate. Thanks to the help of Kyle, who introduced me to the software, it contains the sort of software I could use to make these moving images, and it's not as complicated as the more advanced programs like Adobe Premiere or Sony Vegas are. But unfortunately, it does have its drawbacks too, which I will get onto as this episode progresses. And for the time being, it was really, really nice because it did what I could do, and Pinnacle wasn't the only program I used for this episode. I also used After Effects, since that was the program I used on my course in college. And I even used this in episode 8, but I couldn't mention that because there are only like about 5 scenes in the episode in which contain scenes like this, which were mostly Mothra flying, but it didn't really stick out as well as they do here in this episode, so I thought I'd mention it here instead. Now, the drawback I mentioned earlier about Pinnacle Studio is the fact that if you're going to render, it has to be in a high quality clip, like AVI or MOV. It can't be WMV, otherwise the image comes out incredibly blurry, like what you're looking at right now with Godzilla swimming in the water. You'll notice that his entire body, as well as some of the background, is incredibly blurry because lower quality, it didn't come out right. And the trick is you have to add a sharpen effect to the clip, otherwise, like I said, it gets blurry. So, that was one of the drawbacks, and as you could see, this episode is sort of like the training phase of me using the software. And now that I moved on to Vegas, hopefully the blurriness will not return anytime soon. But for what it worked, Pinnacle has helped me a lot throughout the past few episodes, and I am grateful to Kyle for showing me the software too. Also, as you can see right now, Seagorus is the enemy monster of this episode. As you could tell from the beginning, Seagorus was sent by an outside force who was observing Godzilla and Red King's battle to kill Godzilla for attacking Red King. Who is it? Well, you'll see later on. But, yeah, so basically Seagorus is sort of like a hitman. He was sent to kill Godzilla because Red King couldn't. And so, that's just about it for Seagorus. The surprising thing about the story is that for a while it was supposed to be Barugon from the Gamera series. He was going to be the monster of choice for the episode, and it was going to be written much more differently. Instead, it was going to be Barugon was to be disturbed by Godzilla and Red King's battle, and he ultimately breaks off a chunk of ice and floats out to sea until he reaches Monster Island, where he ultimately battles Godzilla in a frozen battle sort of scenario. But ultimately, Seagor's worked for what I was trying to do with the episode, and for something else I have planned later on in the series. And another thing, while the idea of Barugon is interesting, what's more interesting is the fact that I used another location besides Monster Island for the fight scene, in the middle of the ocean. And to sort of tie into that, around this time was G-Fest 17, the first G-Fest where I met Nick, and together we both saw a movie, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, and that was part of the inspiration behind the rewriting of this episode. The entire session we had watching the movie was pretty much like, not a rant, but like a roast or something along those lines. You know what I mean, where we just crack fun at the movie for its flaws and whatnot. I mean, it is the Sony dubbing after all. But anyway, it was part of the reason why this episode got rewritten and why Seagoras got replaced instead at the last second. So, yeah, I'm glad that I went there, and you can thank that for changing up to Barugon. Now, now getting back onto the use of motion graphics in the episode, it allowed me to create a lot new effects like I've never had before. Like this scene right here, with Seagoras moving around. That's actually a green screen, and every 30th of a second I have that little lightning bit on his horn, as well as that what you just saw a while back there, the underwater tornado, as well as the suplex scene. You can't do that with normal moving images without it looking choppy as heck. And so this is, again, one of the most trickier ones because it all depends on the layering. You have to get the layering right, otherwise the entire film is going to look pretty tricky. It's hard for me to explain, but thanks to the use of motion graphics and the knowledge I gained about how layering works in it, I was able to create more impressive scenes like that right there, as well as the suplex and the later scene with Seagoras, which you'll see later on in the episode. And I am grateful to the course for teaching me that sort of thing. Another thing, and that trail of Godzilla's atomic ray, that I had also learned from After Effects. That was not going to be in there. It was originally just going to have Godzilla strike Seagoras, but having a trail instead to knock him down just seemed like a much more interesting effect that one cannot normally pull off. So that's why I put that in there. Another thing, this moment right here where Godzilla tosses up Seagoras and flies up there, I wanted to show off that because Godzilla's underwater, he can move more nimbly and much more faster than he normally would on land. So I wanted to give him a little bit more DBZ-esque movements and give him this sort of ability to actually move twice or 3 times as faster as he normally would. Also, this one scene right here where Seagoras crashes and the dirt flies up, I should also mention that thanks to the introduction of Pinnacle and Vegas, this episode sadly marks the last of the hand-drawn explosion or other effects as well, because, now that there are some chroma key or keying out effects that exist on the internet that I can find, thanks to the help of my friends, it just helps portray the action a little bit more better. And while all the hand-drawn effects will not disappear, like for example Godzilla's ray and the bubbles, they will not disappear. Stuff like fire and water will probably be substituted for the newer effects. So this is sort of like, this episode marked the last hurrah of that. Now this scene right here, this is of course the tsunami scene. Where I got the tsunami, I'm not going to mention for safety purposes. This actually was supposed to be a little bit different. Sigurus and Godzilla's battle was actually supposed to be on the shore of Monster Island, but if I had used but if I had used that, the tsunami would have struck Monster Island and just flooded everything, and it just didn't really work out the way I wanted it to. So I'm sort of glad that I changed it to the middle of the ocean, so we don't know, nor is it that big of a concern in where the tsunami strikes. And considering recent events, aka last year, in Japan, I think that's for the better that we don't know where it struck. And also, that horn effect there, I also wanted to imply in the series that Sigurus' horn is not just weather controlling horn, it's more of a water control. I mean, granted, he does create a tornado with it with the help of sea mons, but that's about it. Most of the time, it's usually just good for water and lightning, not really it's not just weather all by himself. Only when surrounded by his mate does he actually possess those superpowers. Also, that one little scene there with the tsunami disappearing, that unfortunately was a last-minute addition I had to work with Pinnacle. It was supposed to sink down into water and disappear much sooner, but unfortunately I didn't have enough time to add that effect, so sorry about that. And one little tiny anatomy blunder I made there, if you can see with his horn, there's some blood on it. I accidentally made that mistake, as horns don't possess blood inside of it, it's all just bone. And, well, it was basically to imply that Sigurus' horn has been blown off by Godzilla, so minor fix there. Or minor problem. And also, this is perhaps one of the gorier deaths I have to admit right here, with Godzilla firing his horn. Oh, firing his ray, sorry about that. And blowing up Sigurus' head. Boom. Yeah. Again, I wanted to sort of poke a little bit of fun at Kyle's style and make the death a little bit more gorier than usual. And sort of a little more, not explainable, but more possible or reasonable, since normally blowing up is just weird in tokusatsu. But I just wanted to add that to sort of, again, poke fun and acknowledge that some deaths can be a little more realistic in this series. And so that pretty much ends the main footage of episode 9. The rest of the episode consists of stock footage to once again state that the episode 9 does take place in between episodes 1 and 2, and that the pilot still does play an important role in the series, which, like I said, I'll get back onto as the series will progress. Now, as for anything else I should probably mention, if there's anything on here, what else? As for motion graphics, unfortunately, I don't have After Effects. I don't know if I will for a while, but Sony Vegas will be there to help me out for the majority of the series, and hopefully, when the time comes for some of the harder to make episodes, I'll be able to rely on it in order to make the same special effects. So, yeah, this episode, again, to reiterate, this episode marks the beginning of newer and more better special effects, as well as the end of as well as the reliance on just Movie Maker, because Movie Maker was very important, and it still is, and, well, the series is still expanding and growing, so, yeah. It's the beginning of something new and something better for everybody. And so that's it. I hope you enjoyed episode 9, and I'll see you all next month for episode 10. And, as for this tiny little teaser here, if for anybody who wants to know who this monster is, stay tuned for season 2. See you later.